I think it's just important for journalists in Denmark because it's so easy to. I see it with fellow entrepreneurs where like they like to write these articles about entrepreneurs saying, okay, so this is not very successful because they had a big loss last year. Okay, but they grew from 20 million in revenue to 100 million,
exactly.
and this is a big improvement.
So welcome to our second episode of Funded by Plus Impact. We're live from the Blocks Hub recording studio, and today we're joined by Mise, CEO of Organic Basics, and one of their key investors, Daniel Nyvang, managing partner in Bumble Ventures. First of all, thank you so much for wanting to sit down with us. Mise and Daniel, can you maybe quickly introduce yourself and what's your relationship?
For sure. I go first, maybe.
Yes.
I'm Daniel from Bumble Ventures. Really quick about me. Went to school at Copenhagen Business School. Did finance there. Was finished in 2010. Went out to PricewaterhouseCoopers and did mergers and acquisitions for 4 years and learned that toolbox and that world and also got to a point where I knew that I wouldn't want to be in that world forever, albeit a great experience, but not for me for the rest of my life. And around late 2013, I got the brilliant idea to start a tech startup with two other guys, and we raised some money and executed on that in 14, 15, and part of 16, and that was a great experience. It was a very tough experience. It was hopefully the toughest experience of my life, and we didn't succeed in the way that Mise and his co-founders did. So we ended up making the hard decision to close it down in the middle of 16 there, and after that I had to find some way to make myself useful again, and that was just I think sort of natural for me at least to try to stay on the scene, but be on the other side of the table, at least for a meaningful amount of time, piece my life back together and that kind of thing. And so since 16, been doing Bumble Ventures with my two partners, Jesper and Christian, and we then we invested off our own balance sheet until basically September last year, where we made a fund. Okay. So until then, we were just investing our own money, but now we made a fund. $30 million closed it last year, where we now also have other people investing. So we also handle other people's money now, and so
Super exciting.
Yes, that's amazing news. Closing a big fund like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the Danish context, we're very proud of it, and it is a big, but of course very small compared to some of the big US funds, right? But it's a good place to start, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you, Mise?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Mise. I'm not the CEO, I'm the co-CEO of Organic Basics. So we started Organic Basics back in 2015 in Aarhus. I started it along with my co-founders, Christopher and Alex. We all knew each other since we were quite young. But basically, back in 2015, that was before anyone really started to talk about sustainability in the fashion industry. And when we started the company, we had this feeling that the fashion industry is the second most polluting industry in the world, and it seemed a bit weird because it was fashion. It wasn't medicine. It wasn't like education or something that's actually quite important, right? So we felt that wasn't right, and we wanted to make a change in that. And I think the purpose has sort of like grown over the years, and the more you learn about it, and also just with the more sort of the fact that it's becoming more something that people care about, and it also empowers us to do even more in that direction. But yeah, we started back in 2015, and we were very inexperienced. So we launched on Kickstarter, which was back then was all the fuss, and it was like very popular. Around that time, what was it called? $1. What was it called? Dollar Shave Club?
Dollar Shave Club.
Dollar Shave Club was one of the major startups in the US, and one of my co-founders, Alexander, he had spent some time in San Francisco, so we were obviously very inspired by that entire scene. So we actually launched a men's boxer subscription service as our initial product.
So that was part of the Kickstarter?
That was a Kickstarter back then. Yeah, we got funded within 48 hours, and it was a big success for us. I only think we raised 100,000 Danish or a bit more, but for us that was a lot back then. It was enough to get the first production and so on.
Wasn't it the biggest Kickstarter campaign back in the days, or
so
one of the?
We've actually done 3 Kickstarter campaigns because for us that was before any investors had any interest in us, and it was a great way to raise both awareness and fundraise as well. So we did 3 Kickstarters. One of them became one of the biggest in the Nordics, but not the first one.
All right.
Okay.
So you learned by doing, basically.
Yeah, that was pretty much trial and error. There was not much of a blueprint back then for how to do it.
Yeah, but also, like, if you scroll through Kickstarter campaigns today, like, you can find, everything basically, right? But, like, what can you trust? What can you not? Like, how do you execute that funding strategy? I mean, and how did you even, like, get into that? Did you have anyone who could help you out setting up your Kickstarter campaigns?
We actually didn't, but from the beginning, the founding team, we also had a 4th partner back then, but the founding team was sort of, we were good in our own areas, so we actually had the internal competencies to sort of like set that up, and we found a good blueprint in a way to sort of like replicate what we did the first time, and that gave us a lot of initial traction, especially in the US, because it's mostly US based, right?
Yeah.
But then in 2017, at that time we were actually living in San Francisco. All the founders, we moved there because we had this probably very naive idea that San Francisco, Silicon Valley, that's where all the big startups come from, so that's where we need to be as well. And also we had a lot of US traction with the Kickstarter, so we went over there and we lived in it's a very classic startup story actually, right? Because we lived in the same house, we had our office right outside our bedrooms and so on, and we stayed over there for a full year, which was actually also at that point we met Daniel, and where we raised our first round of investments, which again at that point was a huge deal for us, and we thought with that money we would have enough to do everything and so on. And and then we went back to Denmark in 2018 after we raised this investment, and we established an office at Vesterbro, a small apartment there, and sort of built the team from there. Now we reside in Amager. We're about 45 people. And the change or the focus has changed quite a bit since we did men's boxer shorts on a subscription. Now we focus more on actually producing the most sustainable garments we can. We focus actually more on women than we do on men, because for some reason we learned they care more about their underwear than men do, which was probably not a big surprise to a lot of people. We also learned that many women are sort of like further in their head when it comes to sustainability and organic qualities and so on. So we sort of, I think what they call in Silicon Valley, they would say we pivoted from this initial product.
And what's so special about this underwear? You have a special material or fabric, right?
Yes. So when we, that's actually also going quite a bit back. But in 2017, when we did this big Kickstarter campaign, we used something called Silvertech, or we trademarked it Silvertech. So it's antibacterial technology that will sort of make the clothing last longer in many ways, especially because it's antibacterial and therefore you don't have to wash that often, and that's sort of like how you, one thing, ruin your clothing, but it's also a big environmental impact with all the washing that you do. It's 40% of the effect of a piece of clothing. So that was a big thing for us, but I think what we then learned was that was sort of like the functionality aspect of sustainability, which we really cared a lot about at that point. But we realized that there are like many different and less sort of technical ways where you can have a much bigger impact. We also learned that especially the female demographic, they didn't respond too well to not having to wash their underwear. Like it didn't sell too well. So for what we're working more with now, and a material we like much more is Tencel. which is closed loop fiber, originally developed in Austria, I believe. But it's sort of, so what we did previously, we mixed organic cotton with this Silvertech fabric, and organic cotton is much better than regular cotton, but it's not going to save the world in any way. But Tencel, on the other hand, is something that works much more, and that's what we sell the most of now. So we're always trying to steer the customer demand towards the more sustainable product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's also a good starting point. You actually mentioned that you met Daniel. Was that back in?
That was in 2017.
That was in 2017. Was that when you were still in San Francisco?
Yes.
All right. So how did that even come about? Like how did you connect?
So we were raising money almost as soon as we got over there, because it's very expensive to be there. I think even though we lived a lot of people in one house, I think the rent was like 50,000 Danish or something like that. It's incredibly expensive. It's also expensive just to live there, and salaries if you want to hire people and so on. So we started our fundraising journey back then, and I think when you try to raise money the first time, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes, and you're gonna like approach it, or at least we're approaching it differently than we did back then now. But what sort of happened was that we started reaching out to a lot of investors, and actually one of my old school friends had worked in the company that sort of created Daniel's VC fund, and that was sort of like the entry. So I had my old friend forward our pitch deck to Daniel, and then
we didn't actually meet in San Francisco.
Started.
No,
like I was just I was actually living in London at that time. But what was his name?
Anders, he was
Anders,
called.
he was working. So Anders was working at Better Collective, which is my two partners, Jesper and Christian. Their daytime jobs is to be the CEO and COO of a big company called Better Collective. And Anders was working there, I guess, and got the deck. And then Jesper came running and said, "We have to look at this." And then I had a lot of other stuff to do, so I said, "No, we have to look at this."